We're going to make this very formal.
All right, I'm ready.
Welcome, everyone, to our second episode of Culture Chat by CultureLynx. We are very excited. I'm very excited to welcome Liz and Abir to our second Culture Chat. Hey, everyone.
Hey.
Guys.
Hey.
Oh my God, we're so nerdy. We both waved.
Here, let me wave too. There you go.
All right, we're not helping you start this off strong.
We're all in the same club now. Today's topic is India, anything and everything about India. So, before we get started, let's just can you guys share, what's your story? Who are you? How do you relate to one another? What's going on here?
Liz, you want to take the lead on that?
I will, but you jump in and you correct me where you're definitely going to disagree at some point. So Abir and I are married. There's the big reveal. I'm from upstate New York. I grew up in Albany, and Abir is from Guwahati, Assam, India, sort of. I'm sure we'll find out more about that later, but is living in Bangalore. And so he has been born and raised in India. I was born and raised in the US, and we had kind of like a very brief overlap when we both studied for our master's degrees in England and fell in love with each other and honestly made a real effort to stay apart, and it failed miserably. And so now 8 years later, we're married but stuck in two different countries again because we're waiting on visas. But I actually moved to India for roughly a year and a quarter. Year and a half to
just to clarify.
Well, it would have been longer.
It was supposed to be longer, but
it was supposed to be longer, yeah.
More on that later. And
wow.
I ended up living in India, and so it was really interesting for me to get my own kind of experience of, I've seen India on TV. I'd visited India a couple times to visit Abir, of course, but actually living there was a really different experience. And Abir, I know, and I don't want to speak for you, so jump in any point, but you said it was interesting for you to watch me learn about India because I asked you questions you had never considered before.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There were, from very simple things to complicated cultural anecdotes or whatever, but it's when you look at it, it's very different. Like a very small thing like going out to buy rice can mean a completely different thing.
I cried.
You cried buying rice? Liz, why did you cry?
That was the first week. She landed, and 2 days later we went to the supermarket. So we actually went to a hypermarket, which is huge, building with, you can buy anything.
A hypermarket, not like a supermarket, but a hypermarket, which is a step up.
In India, it's a hypermarket, which is I don't know if anybody's ever been to Europe, but been to Géant or Casino, those big, huge markets, but it's roughly, it's like a big, massive,
like a
BJ's or Costco or one of those kind of places.
Yeah.
So we went in there, and so I should have taken her to a smaller place. This is quite overwhelming for even a person living in India as well. So we went there and we were picking up. So we were in the confectioneries aisle, picking up biscuits and stuff. And we go inside and straight. And as it opens up to a huge hall with 50 varieties of rice, 20 varieties of lentils, and she goes up to this one sack. And it's like the refill store. So
let's please be clear. You said, go ahead, go get rice, and then turned and walked away. And I was like, I can
did.
Do that. I'm an adult. I know how to buy rice. And then it was like,
If I was presented with 20 different kinds of rice, I'd probably start crying too.
She came back to me saying there's flat rice. I was like, yes. Why is there flat rice?
Why would they flatten it?
Yeah, but it was quite overwhelming for her that day, and I'm sorry again. But yeah, she started crying, and
it brought you closer together.
Understood that. Sorry.
It brought you closer together.
Yeah. Actually, it made me understand that it's not as simple. I just thought that Liz has lived in so many different countries. She's traveled to all the different parts of the world. This will be easy. And then I have to pay attention. I can't just go do your thing and then.
Yeah. Even with somebody who's very independent, right? Sometimes you realize maybe maybe they do need a little more hand holding initially.
What I didn't mention at the top of this was that I actually studied cross-cultural communication, which makes this whole thing just that much more ironic because I'm supposed to be good at it.
I think that added to your entire thing because you thought that you're really good at it because you've done all of these things. She studied cross-cultural communication, and then at the end of it, stuff like this is overwhelming her. But it's just
But so actually, let's go back to when you guys met. So you met in London.
Like
we met in Newcastle.
Newcastle. Yep. Still the UK. Yep.
You met in Newcastle around like what, 8 or so years ago.
Yep.
And you guys both, did you both study cross-cultural communications or no?
No. I was in engineering.
Engineering.
Indian people do. I was in engineering.
That is a stereotype, but I guess one that's true in this case.
Well, I mean, there's this thing in India where parents really want their kids to either become a doctor, lawyer, or an engineer. But I did enjoy engineering. I love to code, so I did my engineering here. Did my bachelor's of engineering in electronics here, and then went on to do a master's in wireless embedded systems in Newcastle. And
it's actually funny, Gwen, because I said the same thing. I was like, oh my God, that's so stereotypical. Everybody wants their kid to be an engineer. But then I worked in education in India for a while, and I realized that it is equivalent of doing a liberal arts degree in the US.
Yes.
So like when people don't know it's like when people don't know what to do, they're like, oh, well, I'll do engineering, and that's like a good kind of base, and then I can specialize from there, which is so different from what I've experienced, because for me, engineering's for like the crazy smart people who are like above and beyond, but it's seen in like a completely different way, because I was like, oh my God, so stereotypical, but it's actually like what people do when they don't know what else to do, or they're like, oh, well,
if you've not done humanities because in our high school, it gets split into science, humanities, and commerce. And then if you've taken science, and you can do so many things after you've studied the science stream, most people just become either a doctor or an engineer or some form of that, basically.
That's like law school in the United States. If you don't know, all you lawyers out there, I'm sorry. I actually almost went to law school because I didn't know what to do. But so I was actually born and raised in Germany, and in Germany it seems very similar to India in the sense that in Germany they really push the sciences also. Now, what's the school system there like? Because in Germany, I know there's 3 different tracks depending on, whether you're university bound or more towards kind of the apprenticeships kind of side of things. How does it work in India?
So in India, what happens is obviously you join kindergarten, and then you go to...
There's a nice German word.
Kindergarten.
Yes, isn't that German?
It is. It means guarding the children.
Guarding the children.
So we start off with kindergarten, and then we go to class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So as you're nearing the 10th year, you start to get choices to take subjects that you like, and then as opposed to subjects that you don't. So
you don't like. Okay.
We could probably take something like in languages. We were presented with Hindi and Khasi. Khasi is the local language of Meghalaya. So you could take Hindi or Khasi. Everything else is in English. Everything else is in English.
Where you went to school, though, not for everybody.
Yes, not for everyone. For where I went to school. And
did you go to a public school or a private school?
I don't know if this was public or private. It's basically Missionaries of Charity. Private.
It's private school. I think it's hilarious that I know this. I know this because I went to his old school to go do presentations. That's why I know this. But it's a private school, but private schools, they're different. They're different than they are in the US. Like when I think of private school, I think of like you're rolling around in piles of cash in your swimming pool, which you've emptied.
Richie Rich style.
This is just like next.
Well, how do you know I wasn't doing that?
He's swimming while he's counting his cash.
So it's very different. So there's like huge ranges of what it means to actually go to private school. So like you could go to private school on the equivalent of like $1,000 a year, which isn't nothing, of course, especially against like Indian income standards, but it's also not like, it's not unobtainable for a lot of people. So you'll hear of
Hold on 1 second. Honey,
Yeah.
can you please let Teddy out? Sorry, my
That's
dog's
okay.
whining. Okay,
You're fine. So you'll hear of lots of people who go to private school, even if their families are not considered wealthy. You'll hear of, and then there are like the international
different sorts of private school. You have the really super fancy ones, which like only the Bollywood celebrities would go to study there and stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. But there's like a
you go to a school like that? You did not, or did you?
No.
Not the fancy celebrity school, but like a nice.
Oh well, well, there were a few celebrities that came out because the school I went to was established in 1919.
Wow.
And there were a few people who came out of the northeastern area. I think Liz will be able to give you a sense of what it's like in terms of America or Germany. So Victor Banerjee, who went on to do a lot of Hollywood. He moved to the U.S. He did a lot of Hollywood movies in the 70s. He studied there, but it's not that celebrity kids go there or something like that. So.
Yeah.
So the area of India that Abir is from is very it's been very separate for a really long time. So he's from the northeast of India, which the only thing that I can even give it rough equivalence of is Puerto Rico, where it's kind of off on its own. It's like semi-autonomous, and it's tied to the US. Like they're US citizens, but the way that it interacts with the rest of the continental US is just not the same. And that's changed, I think, in recent years. But I know, Abir, especially when you were growing up, like there was a big difference between, mainland India and the Northeast, because geographically speaking, it's connected to the rest of India by this tiny little like piece of land. What is it?
Of land.
14 miles across or 14 kilometers across. It's small. So there's like, it's fairly geographically isolated as well.
I feel like we needed a map for this. I don't.
I wish I was so fancy to blend in a map of India in the background as we were talking.
Oh, it's okay. I could have like held one like this, like here is India.
Right here. So
while you talk about that, let me see if I can find something on my phone.
So
I know we're jumping around quite a bit, but I'm interested in. So I have a few friends who are Indian, and from the little that I know about Indian culture, which I know there's so many different regions and probably subcultures and everything. How did your parents feel about you marrying an American woman?
Oh wow.
Are you allowed to talk about that?
Do you want to answer this?
No, I don't want to speak for your parents. Okay. I mean,
I'll say. I'll say it.
I'll assist.
You'll assist.
So new. Are you kidding? What if they see this?
So for a long time, they were against it. And this is I would like let me give you some reference of the popular culture that affects this kind of decision making for people of their generation. So in most of, let's start with movies, right? That's the best form of popular culture. So in movies, the theme would be the guy who goes to and it's mostly US, because that would be, he's gone to the US or London, right? They say in Hindi, America gaya tha, which means gone to America, or London gaya tha, which means he went to London. More often or not, there's something happens with the guy in these countries that he comes back completely changed, forgets his culture, doesn't want to do anything to do with his parents or his culture, and leaves them, or basically takes the property, owns the property, throws them out, and then goes back and never comes back again and never sees them.
Sounds horrible, and that's what they portray in movies?
It's horrible. It's like, not all movies, of course not.
That's kind of a predominant narrative.
That's kind of, it's kind of the a theme for a lot of movies. And then there were
an instance of that in your own family as well, didn't you? Where somebody left and then just never came back.
That never just like broke all contact. Nobody knows where he is right now. He's somewhere in continental United States, but nobody knows where he is.
Those Americans.
The worst.
Those Americans.
They're the worst.
But yeah, so these kind of things kind of play up in your head, and because India is so diverse, and they have so many different kinds of people. So whenever someone asks you, who are you, or asks you for your background, you the first thing you say is, I'm Assamese.
Mm-hmm. The way people actually say it is, I belong to wherever.
So Assamese as in from Assam.
From Assam. So, but when people say like, oh yeah, I live in Bangalore, I belong to Assam.
Yeah, so even if I've lived here for 15 years, but I still identify myself as from Assam. And that's why people say, even if they move to the US, they're still Gujarati.
Mm-hmm.
Language is different. They have a certain collective culture that they have. Mm-hmm. And it's
their identity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because it's so different, people, if you're from a smaller community, people want to be in that community. So people do marry outside. It's not that it's completely banned or anything. It happens, but preferably first you marry to an Assamese Brahmin girl, and you can tell her about the Brahmin thing later. An Assamese Brahmin girl, or the next best thing will be an Assamese girl. Next best thing will be I'm sorry, we keep saying girl here, and I know
man,
there's
doesn't matter.
Where you say girl and boy instead of man and woman. Or you get married to an Indian woman from parts of the country where it's similar, and then an Indian woman from any part, and then So
is the lowest ranking basically to marry a foreigner?
No,
not always.
Because there's this whole, because of colonization, there's also like it's a kind of like the dating the bad boy kind of thing, where like it's kind of desirable because there's this like fetishization and like still this ingrained mentality in certain ways of like the foreigner, but at the same time the understanding that yes, the foreigner might completely ruin like our entire family thing we've got going on here.
Wow.
And one of the things is that Abir is an only child, which is fairly unusual in India. So like this was like the one shot. And so this is a stressor, but it's not even just like foreign domestic.
Play into your psyche when, I mean, my parents didn't. I mean, they've traveled abroad like once or twice, but
they lived in the UK for a little bit.
Yeah, they lived in UK for about 3 or 6 months. I forget. I was really young at that point in time, and they're quite like they're very liberal, but it's just when it's the society you stay in, and you just, oh wow, what's gonna happen? Maybe this is gonna happen because this happened to this cousin of mine, and there's this, and it was a reluctance in meeting because they didn't want it to happen. So it was a reluctance in meeting. But Liz can tell you the entire story, but I'll just sum it up in like, it took my mom 5 minutes to go from like, I don't know what's gonna happen, to like, she's my daughter-in-law.
I was gonna say, Liz, you probably won over Abir's family in a heartbeat.
5 minutes. I went to
before.
If you would have done this like earlier, I wouldn't have had to go through all of this anxiety in the middle.
Well, it was funny because we had a big fight right before his mom was coming to pick us up. And he was like, what is wrong with you? I was mad about a hairbrush. And I'm like, it's not about the hairbrush. And he was like, okay, so you're nervous. I was like, I'm so nervous. But it was interesting because like this was one of the things that made me so happy about moving to India, was that I felt like I finally got it. Because from my own lens, I was just like, I don't get this. Like, I do not understand how it's humanly possible that like they won't meet me. And I was really offended about it for a long time. And Abir is like, it's not personal. I'm like, how can I not feel like it's personal?
Mm-hmm.
But once I moved and I really understood what I was looking at, it's not personal. It is like a cultural ingrained thing. And his parents, we get along so great now. They have been so amazingly welcoming. Like my
People
family.
have forgotten me in my family.
They what?
They've forgotten me in my family. They don't.
Abir,
I'm not even kidding. This is actually true. They don't even ask about me anymore.
They don't.
well, family is very important, right? So the sense of community is very important in India. I'd like to, if I may, kind of switch over to kind of present time, the coronavirus pandemic. So, many of the viewers out there, maybe like myself, have been reading a lot of articles. I read the New York Times religiously, just to kind of see what's happening out there. Abir, what is happening coronavirus-wise? Like, tell us a little bit about your experience.
Well, what's happened right now, it's we're on track with opening more stuff because the economy has stalled for way too long. So one good thing I think that the government did was that they locked down really hard early on. Mm-hmm. So in the first 3 weeks of lockdown, I was not able to even take a stroll outside my area. Like I couldn't go to the main road to just like even go and take a stroll. It was absolute lockdown. There were cops at every exit of this area, and we were not allowed unless we needed to go
to the hospital.
To the hospital or a pharmacy. And we had
food. What about groceries?
Every neighborhood kind of has like a small store.
Yeah.
No rice hypermarket. This is just like a.
these are like small supermarkets that are open. The hypermarkets are open as well, but I couldn't go to a hypermarket to go and get my stuff. My supermarkets had everything. I could go and get stuff, and food was fine.
You could stay in your neighborhood. You could stay in your neighborhood provided like you really.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. We have pharmacies that we can go and get the necessary drugs and stuff. There's a hospital nearby that I'll just need a little bit of permission. If someone's not well, we can just show that this person's not well and they'll let you go.
They start coughing in your face, basically.
Yeah.
One of the things though that I thought that India did that was amazing was and this is one of the big I feel like India gets so stereotyped in like every which way. You either hear that everybody's super educated or everybody is totally uneducated and illiterate. And what I learned living in India was that it's just the land of contrasts. Like absolutely everything exists there and all can be true. But one of the things that I thought the government did that was super, super smart was people make phone calls because you're not texting, you're not emailing, whatever, if you can't read or write. And so what they did was for every phone call that you placed, there was a message. I mean, I never heard it. I wasn't there, but it basically.
So whenever you call someone till the person picks up, you hear that instead of that, they put in a public service announcement saying that COVID is something called COVID that's killing people. The only way that you can save each other is you need to wash your hands. You need to maintain social distance. And, if you have any of these symptoms, call this number until the person picks up.
And am I right? And am I right that it was in local languages as well?
Yep. Yeah, all local languages.
How many local languages are there?
Oh, I don't even know. I'll have to actually go to Wikipedia to check this.
Literally hundreds, right?
There are hundreds. I mean, you can look at about like an general say about these many languages, but then there are these local dialects that are completely different. And each dialect, and again, with the dialects, there are certain areas that have different accents to the same dialect. They say there's a saying here that the language changes here every 4 kilometers.
Yeah. Wow. So the only thing that I could probably relate to is Swiss German. Swiss German to me is like a whole nother language.
Yeah.
It could be like that, yeah.
Because it's interesting. So, and everybody, I don't know anybody in India, truly nobody, that speaks just one language. I don't know anyone. even if they don't speak it fluently, like Abir, your grandma, for example, who's what, 86 years old, right?
No, 80, 88, 89.
She's old. She's up there. She's like
She's
our
old.
favorite person. She's amazing. She speaks Assamese, but then she understands me when I talk because she went to school during the British times. And if there's a movie in Hindi on TV, she can at least understand it. So like everybody is multilingual, which is amazing.
Do you
But
speak
then
Hindi?
Sorry?
Do you speak Hindi, Liz?
Me?
Yeah.
Me thoda Hindi bol sakte hoon, but only a little bit.
Well, you had me impressed.
Thank you. I can say a couple phrases like perfect parroting and people are like, and then they answer. And I'm like, no.
She does Assamese as well.
I do. But it's not very good.
We mentioned Assam, and then you said another term that I was curious about, Brahmis. Did you say
Brahmin?
Brahmin. Like ramen, ramen.
So
what does that mean?
It's so we've all, I mean, this is gonna end upgraded by the host and now includes
Oh no, this is what we're saying.
Sorry.
Move the 40-minute. We're running out of time. Oh, a gift from Zoom. Awesome.
That was nice.
Thank you, Zoom.
Wow.
Thanks, Zoom. That was very nice.
That was so
Thank you, Zoom.
I'm publicizing this all over my LinkedIn. Get a little PR out of it.
Welcome, Zoom. Yes.
So we've all heard about the
well, maybe not actually.
Evil caste system that exists in India.
Not everybody will have heard about that. You have to explain that because I think
I will. It's well, for people, it's one of those things that people talk a lot about India. It's the caste system, which is a subset of the Hindu religion, which is basically
caste, as in C-A-S-T, not cat.
Caste with a
C-A-S-T-E.
Caste system. Okay.
Caste system. It's kind of like the class system, but it's religious.
Gotcha.
Okay. So it's Hinduism. Hindus were broken down into 5 castes according to the profession that they were they do. So there's a lot of ancient historical fact about this. Right now, it's kind of turned into an animal of its own.
Can I jump in here for a second? Because I want to give some context for people who are like maybe in the US or elsewhere who don't know quite what that means. So when you say by their profession, you're talking about historically what their profession was. So for example, it's like when somebody has, my last name is Sherman, and that's because historically my family were sheep shearers, and so we were called shearmen. Sherman is how my last name came about. So it's kind of similar to the way that like somebody might have gotten that kind of naming historically. We do not shear sheep anymore. I work at a bank, but it's kind of, where it's like a starting point, except in India, it like really, really took root and has actually
defines like your ability to actually move up in the world.
It's kind of complicated because this comes from something called the Yuvanas. It's Sanskrit for, again, profession, and the I'm trying to think of the best way to. So we have the Brahmins, we have the Kshatriyas, we have the Sudras, and we have these 5 things, which basically are the Brahmins are the priests.
Mm-hmm.
The Kshatriyas are the warriors, so the kings and warriors and army men.
Like Game of Thrones.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. And then you go on to merchants, you go on to the peasants and stuff like that, right? So
the Brahmins are the highest class.
Yes, but but historically in ancient India, there always has been
ability.
Is it the Kshatriyas who were the kings and the queens, because they were god kings and god queens as well, and then or the Brahmins who had texts and were educated in interpreting what the gods say. So there always has been this thing, but at some point in time, this is before Christ. I don't know the exact date. I'm a history buff.
This is why we need you, Abir.
So something called the Manu Smriti was written, which is the book of Manu.
Uh-huh.
He kind of wrote down what Hindus should be doing, should not be doing in all aspects of life, and that in that book he wrote down the professions of the different vanas, and in that book it was mentioned that you cannot move from one vana to another, although historically there has been one of the biggest empire. The king of one of the biggest empires was from the lowest vana, and he ruled.
Vana meaning
caste.
A caste.
Oh, Vana's a caste. Okay.
So can I, Abir, let me see if I'm getting this right. So basically, this was just a historical classification for what your profession was, and people could move, could be, it was fluid.
Not always. We weren't very. So the thing is, it's not like, oh, it's this great thing that has been modeled. It wasn't. You could move up and about in the top 3 classes, but you would really have to like really do something extraordinary to become a king if you're from the lowest class. Which one of it's the Nanda kingdom. Mahapadmananda was the first one who went up. He was a Shudra king, and he ruled almost all of
This has caused like a ton of problems. So this is the old historical thing, and now it's technically discrimination on the base of caste and everything it's illegal in India, but it happens all the time. And it not only influences how somebody thinks about.
It also depends. I'm sorry, I just want to say one thing. It also depends from which part you are in, because some parts it has a really, really strong hold, and
parts of India, you're saying.
Some parts of India, it has a real stronghold where people still struggle with it, and there's some parts where it doesn't exist anymore because that entire part of the country is Christian now. It's 90% Christians.
90% Christian.
Yeah.
It's where I grew up.
What's your faith?
I'm a Hindu.
You're a Hindu. Now, tell me about this thing that I've been reading about that actually Liz educated me about, is the Citizens Register.
This is Uncle's video of here. I sent her Uncle's videos.
Oh, you said Uncle's videos?
Uncle is is the name you give to somebody who's like a man the next generation up, who you don't even know them necessarily personally. Like, it's how you call it.
You like them. You like
Uncle. You're like, yeah, that's a likable person.
Friendly character, the man from down the street. Uncle.
Exactly. The man from down the street is.
Yeah, like, oh, that uncle. Yeah, nice guy.
The kids around my house call me Rajkhowa uncle. So.
And they call me the foreign auntie. They're like, oh yes, one foreign auntie lives in that house.
So we mentioned caste, Vana, and you talked about, so there still is some discrimination based on what your caste is.
A lot of discrimination.
So not some, a lot of discrimination. What is happening with this Citizens Register in India?
Again, so this is everything is very
synopsis.
India. So
you want me to do this one? I can take this one if you're. Do you wanna
do this? Okay, why don't you take this one, and I'll jump in if I have to.
So there's 2 different things that are happening. One is the NRC, which is the National Register of Citizens, correct? National Register of Citizens.
Yes.
And the other is the CAA, which is the Citizenship Amendment Act. And to boil down an extremely complex issue, in Assam, the state that Abir is from, they have enacted a National Register of Citizens because before Bangladesh was its own independent country, it was part of India. So Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh were all one country.
And then it was part of Pakistan. It was East Pakistan.
And then during partition, it broke into Pakistan, West Pakistan, which is present-day Pakistan, and East Pakistan, which is present-day Bangladesh, and India. So Bangladesh got its independence from present-day Pakistan with the help of India. And what ended up happening is that because of these historical connections and the very common language, culture, etc., there has been a relatively porous border between India and Bangladesh, and there has been a lot of migration over the years between Bangladesh and India, and the people who have come across are largely unregistered. And
so just let me stop you there. So are people moving more into Bangladesh or India or both?
Into India, mostly into India. Yep. And when I say crossing the border, like I've been there, it's like literally a flag in the middle of a field. It's not like people are, you know, like sneaking over a mountain in the middle of the night. No, it's like not dramatic at all. It could literally. It could literally.
There are checkposts around, but I mean, to like an untrained eye, it still looks like, well, I think I can make that.
And
there are guns and stuff people pointed at you from like checkposts which are far away, but you know, at night, if it's dark, you know.
I mean, we saw somebody walking around with his grazing cow, and like the cow walked to India, the cow walked back. Like it's really not a big deal. But so what's been happening over time is like, and I think it's very important to remember that the vast majority of these people are just like trying to make a life. They're not disrupting things. They're pretty chill. But over
in India, why do they want to leave Bangladesh?
Well, not right now, because Bangladesh is doing really well with their GDP and everything, and that they've proven it over and over again. But historically, it may be still so for some people who do come in. Historically, it's because of economic reasons. Because once you cross into India, India is always the place where you can make money.
Makes sense.
So what's been happening is that over, you know, the last X number of years, there's been quite a lot of migration. And in
starting off with, I'm so sorry, I'm just cutting you. It started off, so when East Pakistan said that we wanted an independent nation, there was an outright war. So India sent their troops to help East Pakistan fight this war with West Pakistan. Well, they were all Pakistan. We just called them East Pakistan, West Pakistan, so that we know who we're referring to. While that happened, that was a huge war that happened. A lot of people came into Assam because we border Bangladesh. Mm-hmm. Assam, Meghalaya, all of the northeastern states, most of it in the south, northeast. We have borders with Bangladesh, so there were a lot of refugees who came up to obviously save their lives. And then once the war was won and Bangladesh was its own country, the refugees were asked to go back to their homes because it was safe again. A lot of them went back, but a lot of them stayed. So what happened is, because they stayed, it was in the 1950s, right? So India got its freedom in 1947. So to try and figure out who were Indians and who were Pakistanis and who were Bangladeshis, there were many times that India has tried to make rules saying, if you were here since, if your grandfather was here since. So there were many rules that were made over time to try and figure out the citizenship of a person. Because
that's so interesting though, because do people actually have the documentation? I mean, in India, do people maintain records and documents and birth certificates and all that?
So in the beginning, it was just given de facto because the Indian partition was such a horrible calamity for humanity that it was trains and trains, like entire trains of dead bodies coming into the station.
Partition meaning when the British left and divided India and Pakistan into separate.
And because basically the division was was done on the basis of religion, but the person who was tasked with this monumental task, Sir Radcliffe, he had only visited India once before for a few days and didn't have a lot of idea about the cultural integrity of India and what's
the impact, right, of his.
And this is like what happened with the European powers in Africa, where they were just like, these seem like good lines, like let's just spice it up and going across language, religion, tribe.
So there are a lot of places in India who I'll give you a really good example. So Sikhism is one of the religions in India, and one of the holiest sites in Sikhism is now on the other side of the border in Pakistan. And the best thing, and India has the highest amount of Sikhs in the world.
Mm-hmm.
The closest that these people can get to this religious site, which is so important to them, is on a check post with a pair of binoculars.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
But so now, after so many years, last year there was a corridor made where you didn't need to get a visa. You could just, it was a corridor made up till the religious monument, and you could just go and come back. And this was a big thing because if you look at the videos, it's so heartwarming because there were, Pakistani people and Indian people, they've always, there's no difference. They say that if you go into Lahore and if you go into Delhi, you're gonna smell the same smells. You're gonna hear the same sounds. Absolutely the same sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Not anymore because
I'm envisioning like a tunnel to a holy site, but that's probably not what it looks like at all.
Not totally off. I've got our map of India here so that you can see where we're talking about. It's tiny. But so Abir was talking. So the orange is India, and Pakistan, which is present day Pakistan, is here. This is Pakistan. And then this, wow, this is so hard to do backwards. Wow, it was really a struggle.
I should share my screen and look it up.
So here is Bangladesh, right here. Oh, man, come on, Liz. Here's Bangladesh in green. And then you can see it's all surrounded by orange. So that's where people are coming up into Assam and the other parts of the Northeast. And so basically what they tried to do was to take a census and register who is Indian, who is Bangladeshi again.
I mean, the United States does that with the census every year, in a way.
In a way. But what ended up happening is, and it's very controversial, so it really depends on who you...
Assam, okay, just to start off, Assam wanted the NRC. Assam, the northeastern states wanted the NRC because unlike the US, India has so many different languages, and there's something about people want to protect their language. For example, in Tripura, which was filled with indigenous Tripuris who had their own language, were flooded, and right now everything's written in Bengali. Nothing's wrong with Bengali being written everywhere. It's just that actual indigenous people have lost the voice. Mm-hmm. The entire area belonged to.
And so what's happened is that Assam was asking for this NRC so that they could get sight of kind of the makeup of the country. And because obviously when you have citizenship, you have voting rights. And so what ended up coming of this was there was this big census done, and it was not well executed, and a lot of people were left off the list because, as you mentioned, the documentation required is very, there was like arduous. It depends on it's arduous depending on what your situation is, right? So like Abir's family had all their records and that was fine, but like Abir, you weren't on the list the first time, right? You were off the list.
I was, but I came like much later.
So like people were
getting literally they're individuals are on a list, and Abir, you were not on the list initially because you were inadvertently.
No, I was just waiting because the list was being processed. It's just that I came, like my parents were processed before me.
Okay, so they wanted to confirm who was actually from Assam or from India.
So the first draft of the NRC was done in Assam because we demanded it, and this was demanded because Assam did not want it to be overflow, because like Liz said, if a lot of people come in.
Overflow is not a very nice word. Let's pick a different word.
So if there were a lot of people come in and from Bangladesh and were giving voting rights, the fear was we're going to lose our language, we're going to lose our culture. Because the northeast area of India is a complex place where there are very small tribes that have their own unique language. There are probably about 300 people only 300 people that speak the language. and
So tell
nowhere.
us, what is wrong with this National Registry of Citizens exactly? Liz, you mentioned it's very controversial. So
It is.
so just, like food for thought, or playing devil's advocate. So the government goes ahead and says, hey, we want to create a national, registry of citizens. What's the big deal?
So as far as I'm concerned, and Abir, you can tell me your thoughts on this as well. The big deal is that, one, people who have lived their entire lives in India have been left off, which is a big problem. And two, the real controversy came when the CAA was added. So in isolation, neither one of these things is necessarily like a huge deal. Like, yes, I don't feel great about having people on a list. I think that's a little concerning, but when you add them together, that's kind of where the big controversy comes. And the reason being that, so as Abir has mentioned, Assam is incredibly diverse in terms of tribe, language, culture. And it is true, there are parts of Assam that are actually protected, that where people can't move to because it's trying to preserve. It's like sort of the rough equivalent of people moving onto a Native American protected piece of land.
Yeah.
It's to preserve the culture and the heritage. And so what the CAA did was it said that anybody who has been in Assam or India in general since, is it 2014 or 2015, as long as they are not of the majority religious group of Asia, which is Muslims, you can have citizenship.
So they're targeting Muslims.
So what it essentially means is that if you are not Muslim and you've been in Assam or India since 2015, we will give you citizenship. However, however long. I'm sorry, before that date, we will give you citizenship. However, there are a whole bunch of Indian citizens who have lived there their entire lives who are Muslim who cannot prove that they have the right documents.
To prove because they don't have any the documents.
Right. So if they were Hindu and they didn't have the documents, they would say, that's fine, you're an Indian citizen. But because they're not, because they aren't Hindu or Sikh or Jain or not Muslim, they are essentially being made stateless, even though there's no proof that they're actually from India.
And there are two kinds of protests that were happening. One in mainland India because of what Liz said. The other in Assam, which I was in the middle of it. I saw like my state starting to burn.
He was at a wedding and got stuck.
I was at a wedding and we literally got stuck with things being burnt all around us.
That is so wild. That just
we were. I mean, we still are. We're protesting because apart from Kashmir, the highest density of Muslims anywhere in the world, anywhere in India, is in Assam.
Yes.
We have Assamese Muslims as well. So we are not, we don't want, it's not about religion for us at all, which now it has turned out to be this big religious thing. It's not, it has never been about religion for the
why do you think the government is singling out Muslims?
There are a lot of things that you can say about this, but with us, well, I can say one thing is Assam never wanted people to come from Bangladesh to change the language and the cultural landscape of our land. We have nothing, like we have no problems with any religions. Have the highest concentration of Muslims next to Kashmir, so we've never had that problem. That's why we were saying that it doesn't matter if the person is Hindu, Sikh, Christian, or anything. If that person is coming from somewhere else, that person can influence our very fragile language and culture ecosystem that we have, which is anyways has been a target for a long time since independence.
And one of the things that I know that I've heard from like other friends that I want to mention, because when I first heard this, to me, I was like, this just sounds incredibly xenophobic, because if I compare it against the US, it just sounds like we don't want foreigners. And that makes me very uncomfortable.
Also, to me, as a German, I think back to World War II and I'm thinking of like ethnic cleansing. I mean,
yeah, exactly. So I'm like, people on a list, I don't like it.
Yeah.
So, but I had to really like look into this a lot more, because one of the things that I was not aware of is that there are parts of the Constitution of India that actually protect this part of the country because it is so unique and so fragile in terms of its makeup. And essentially what's happening is that there is a homogenous ethnic group being, if these two things combine, you're getting a homogenous ethnic group and religious group for the most part, and language group for the most part, in mass being given voting rights. And it's upsetting the balance of the state. And so the concern that I have what I have led to understand from this, have come to understand from this, is that people, it actually has nothing to do with the individual people who have come from Bangladesh. That's not it at all. It's the fact that there's a concern of, you've got these very small, unique ethnic groups who now, it's not like with kind of natural migration where things change over time. It is millions of people being given voting rights in a block immediately. And that does, and because of the way that the Constitution is written, the Northeast has, that part of the Northeast has 7 states. And because of the way the Constitution is written and because of the areas that are protected, the Constitution says that people can only settle in certain areas if they want to move to protect this area. So there are multiple states in those 7 states that are exempted from people moving in and having citizenship rights in their states. So what ends up happening is, I think it's only 2 states, Abir, is that right? Assam and Tripura, that have to absorb the millions of citizens. So instead of having them spread out and having the voting change slightly in each place, it's now millions of people being, it would be like if New York State all of a sudden they moved everybody from Arizona and we're like, all right, New York, you now have all of these new citizens that you have to absorb. But if New York was made up of like a ton of different language, ethnic, cultural, religious groups,
I mean, if you look at it, it is like there are these small little places where, in New York State City, where
in a way,
religions and stuff.
But it was very hard for me to understand as an American because it just sounded like very ethnocentric and very like scary.
It sounds a little nuts, but we're in a very interesting time in history where, you know, we had opened up our borders to international trade for a very, very long time, and we encourage international trade and we encourage the movement of people, which actually does have an effect on culture, right? Yeah. But now we've seen these kind of protectionist measures where, whether it's due to the coronavirus, we're kind of closing off our borders again. We're saying, wait a second, we don't want to interact with other people, or because we're trying to protect our own culture and our language. We've seen that. I mean, Liz, you lived in France, right?
Yep.
We've seen that with the French culture, and actually in Germany as well. I mean, I keep referring to Germany, but that's kind of what I know.
Sure.
You know, we had influx of Syrian immigrants and immigrants from all over.
And Turkish immigrants, I think.
I've always been very proud of the fact that we've taken in immigrants, you know, despite the challenges from a cultural standpoint. But it's interesting to see that really this movement, it happens all over the world.
And what's I think very interesting, what I think is so interesting with this is that it's not even that the culture is like, you know, vastly different. But what I think a lot of Assamese people, at least who I've spoken to, they're upset about 2 things, which is 1, losing the small individual cultures that make Assam what it is and keeping it, you know, how it is.
Sorry.
It's okay.
It's just, sorry. This had happened once before in the 1800s, because so during the 1800s, during the time of British Raj, Assam was made part of the Bengal constituency. So Assam was in Assam or Northeast. Entire Bangladesh, West Bengal, that's another state, and entire Northeast were put under Bengal. And during that time, obviously they were administered from Calcutta. And because they were administered from Calcutta, there were sweeping changes made in the education system, in history studies, in social studies, all of that, where there was no mention of these small little, say, freedom fighters or people of our kings, because there were kings as well. There were kingdoms. There were small little kingdoms that you could study about, from a culture that you belong to. but they removed all of that. They stopped teaching Assamese. So kids started to forget their own language. And
like Abir, you can't read and write in Assamese.
I can, but it'll take me years just to read one sentence. Read or write. I can speak.
It's his first language, and he can't.
It's my first language,
and so speak it.
Yeah.
I do speak it. It's just I can't. I mean, it's but I didn't study it because
it wasn't available.
Yeah, it wasn't available. But it was just Hindi, Khasi, or English. So yeah.
So it's not like this is a totally unfounded fear. Like this is something that has happened.
It has happened before, and that's why we had the Bhasha Andolan in the 80s.
Yeah.
Their thing came into existence.
So, but it's a tough balance, right? Between making sure that like individual people aren't villainized, making sure that Assamese Muslims don't lose citizenship.
Yeah.
And also making sure that the tribes of Assam and of the Northeast in general don't get wiped out and completely have all of their voting power and their political power stripped because they become such a minority within a minority that they lose that. So it was very interesting for me to learn the context because just on its face, I was like, this is horrifying in every way. But once I learned more about the context, I was like, oh, this is still horrifying, but for different reasons.
I have to admit, my head is kind of spinning. It is just such a complex.
It's a very complex issue, yeah.
And you lose a lot of like the reporting that you see in the US and in the UK for sure is all about the piece of people wanting to protect the secularity of India and wanting to make sure that Muslims aren't unfairly targeted, which is great and I think is very, very necessary. But the piece about the Northeast gets lost within the larger. Everybody's upset, but everybody's upset for different reasons. Right? Like that's
actually what the latest news, at least here in the United States, what we've been seeing about India is really kind of the fight with China over that.
Oh yeah, wow, yeah.
The
territory in the Himalayas. Like, what is happening there? China's just trying to exert its
dominance.
Power.
They have.
Where is it? Arunachal Pradesh?
No. It's Ladakh. 200 kilometers from Pongang Lake. They constructed an entire airport within 2 weeks and have moved 3 of their fighter planes. Basically, they back engineered Sukhois. Which is a Russian plane. So they've moved it there, and they're starting to push into India. So
I have to say, it's very clever to attack a country in the midst of a crisis and in the midst of a global pandemic when you're probably, your resources are stretched and you're at your weakest.
It's so interesting though, because like where Abir is from is very near to Bhutan and China, like the borders. Not that we can.
You go on Arunachal Pradesh, it's China. So China.
I can't the map. But your food is even like you eat bamboo shoots. You eat like a lot of stuff that you don't see in any other.
Assamese food is very different from what people consider as Indian food in the rest of the world. It's very different.
When I go, his family makes like real Indian food because it's fancy, and I'm like, no, give me the good stuff. Give me the Assamese stuff. But it's totally different.
It's more soupy, kind of Thai. I can't really explain it. Liz, I think, would be better person.
You have me intrigued. You have me at soupy. Teasing.
You eat momos. Like, for example, momos are like a big Assamese thing, and they're steamed dumplings.
No, they're actually Tibetan, but like it's a big thing in Assam.
Yeah,
the proximity.
So Abir, so you've never been to the United States. You've been married to Liz for 8+ years.
Well, we've been together.
8 years?
Together 8+ years, and married for a year and a half.
Oh, it's been a year and a half only. Okay, so that makes me feel a little better. But like, when are you guys gonna be reunited again? What's your game plan?
We'll let you know when we do.
We're doing. We're trying to do a lot of things to try and be in the same country. And I mean, she can be in India. But at this point, she can't. If she is in India, she can't work or start a thing, according to the visa laws. And for me to get to America, I was almost like 75%
so close.
Process till COVID hit. So and after that, the consulates in India have been closed indefinitely. So we're waiting for that to open.
Oh, it's so hard for so many people right now. I mean, I can't see my own family in Germany because my father doesn't have U.S. citizenship. So when am I going to see him again? I don't know. It's hard for a lot of people. My heart goes out to you for sure.
It's something I don't think people realize or think about because it's just closed until.
Yeah, but even without COVID, I mean, the immigration laws are so restrictive. Good thing you're an engineer, though. There's a lot of companies out there that are willing to sponsor, foreign for visas.
I think so, but I don't know how much. Also, yeah.
There are, but at the moment, part of the issue is that if he, one is an immigrant visa, which is I'm intending to stay. The other is a non-immigrant visa, which is I'm not intending to stay. I'm just going to come for a little bit and go back. Mm-hmm. And if you file for a non-immigrant visa, it can really affect your immigrant visa case and vice versa, because he's already filed for like a spousal visa.
I had applied for a tourist visa to come
visit.
Just come visit. I had everything. They were letters and well, I mean, I was told, but I think it's a good idea to tell the person who's gonna let you into the country that I have another visa
application processing.
So, yeah. So I mean, I could have like kept it quiet and just like tried to sneak off, but it's not great, right? So told the person that the visa officer that, hey, I have an immigrant visa filed. I'm just going to go see my wife, my family, because it's been a long time, and it was Amanda's graduation, right?
No, it was my 30th birthday, my aunt's 60th birthday, my great aunt's 90th birthday. It was a 36th
right. That's a big occasion.
And then the guy said, "Well, wait, what?" I said, "I have a green card, a CR1 visa pending." Waiting for the interview. It's like, just give me a moment. I'm like, sure. If you need any details, I have everything here. I was just literally every time I go into the U.S. consulate, I'm carrying like a stack of like papers to prove where I am, how much I earn, where do I live, everything. So
and of your firstborn child when the time comes.
It's hundreds of dollars, right? Like every time you file, it's like hundreds of dollars. In India, you have to appear in person. So you can't apply for a tourist visa. You have to go and be interviewed, but you can only go to a certain consulate. So for us, that meant flying to another city, staying in a hotel.
It's a 2-minute interview. They ask you where you're going, what you're going for, and yes or no.
Yeah, you would think they'd kind of roll with the times and maybe throw things on Zoom.
So they looked at his and they were just like, "Oh, you have."
He called a supervisor, and I could hear him say, "This is the situation," and I could hear him.
Oh
like, no! Sorry, sir. If you have something filed, we can't let you in.
So nice. Even if he applied for a sponsorship now, like he would be very unlikely to get it because he's already filed the application to come as a spouse. So we were kind of
Abir and Liz, I know we've talked for probably a good hour already, and I feel like we could talk for hours and hours and hours. I'm so fascinated. You have me intrigued. I would love to come and visit India sometime.
Can I ask one wrap-up question? Can I ask a question to everybody here? What do you think is the biggest misconception about your own country? So Gwen, if you want to answer for US or Germany, I'm not sure. Abir,
misconception?
Yeah, Abir, what do you think is the biggest misconception or the biggest incorrect stereotype about India?
Poor.
That you're poor.
Say again? That you're poor.
Yeah.
Well, poverty is striking in India. I mean, it is, right? The difference between the rich and the poor.
It is, but it's just I think it's just the stereotype is to whenever there's, again, I go back to popular culture because that's how you get to see these places.
Right.
When you go to a movie, if they reference India in any way, they're not going to show Bangalore, Mumbai, Delhi, or even Guwahati. They're going to show Dharavi, right? Which is the large slum in
Mm-hmm.
Even if you go into Dharavi, it's called a slum, but it's actually ingenious. They have like leather industries. They have really big, they have entrepreneurs coming out of there doing great things. And it's just that stereotype of, people not getting to eat every day and charmers, and it's just this.
Which
And
it exists.
that
Like,
becomes
it
a
exists.
reflection of you though. But the problem with stereotypes is, right, and we all know this really implicitly, but the problem with stereotypes is not that they're not true. It's that they only tell one side of the story. They're actually incomplete.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got the Ambanis who invited Beyonce to perform at their daughter's wedding and own how big is their house? A 27-story building?
Wow.
Like,
It's they have the most expensive house in the woods. It's $10 billion.
no one's talking about them.
Wow. Yeah, some things to think about.
Totally.
Well, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for sharing your personal story, a little bit more about your background, about what's happening in India during these crazy coronavirus times, and, the NRC and the CAA, all those acronyms. Really, really appreciate your time. And to all of you guys out there, if you have any questions or follow-up to Liz and Abir, email me at gwendolyn@culturelynx.com. And I will forward those questions and get back to you. And thank you again so much for your time, you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. Take care.